Okay, well, a very good morning to everyone. I'm Lucinda with PFH. A very warm welcome to the second in a series of these social value webinars that we've developed in partnership with Social Value UK. I'd like to introduce you to Ben Carpenter, who is CEO of Social Value UK, and he'll be giving us insights and info on the tools available to help us measure social value in our workplaces. So over to you, Ben.
Thank you, Lucinda, for that introduction. Thank you to everyone for joining us this morning. I'm glad you've been able to take some time away from your busy schedules, and I hope today's webinar is going to be useful to you as we explore the subject of social value in the workplace. For those of you that have not met me before, I am Ben. I'm Chief Executive of Social Value UK and Social Value International. There's quite a lot of you on this call today, so obviously we can't do introductions, and I hope to meet some of you soon. Just to give you an overview of this webinar in the context of the series, we've been very pleased to be working with PFH on a series of webinars. PFH have been a member of Social Value UK for a few years now, and it's great to be partnering with them on initiatives like this. So a few weeks ago we did webinar 1, where we looked at sort of some definitions of what is social value and the drivers for it. We also touched on the building blocks for measurement and a short case study. Today is webinar number 2, where we'll be looking at social value in the workplace. We're looking at managing social value. What does that look for in terms of jobs, apprenticeships? And then we've got a third one as well coming up in a few weeks' time, which is about social value in the community. So that hopefully gives you a bit of context of what today is, and I hope some of you were on the first one and will be able to join us for the third. So today's agenda is obviously we welcome introductions, who are, briefly recap ourselves, what is social value. Oh, and I've missed off the very important bit there, which is discussing what social value is in the workforce. And then we'll have some time for questions and answers at the end. So very briefly, because I think most of you were on the last call or are familiar with who we are, Social Value UK shares the mission of its parent organisation, Social Value International, and that mission is to change the way the world accounts for value. If we account for value in a different way, looking beyond just financial value and cost and price, then we will be able to make better decisions that should reduce inequality, environmental degradation, and improve well-being. We are the national chapter, but there are 25 other countries that have similar networks and members in another 45. These members all come together to develop what are emerging standards in social value accounting. And we provide opportunities for members to contribute to the development of these standards and guidance, and we deliver training which are consistent with these standards and provide assurance and accreditation as well to go with that. Very much an open network, bottom up if you like, with practitioners leading the emergence of this new field. And our approach to accounting for value is very much based on principles rather than a standardized set of measures or metrics. We would standardize the process and encourage people to apply the principles of social value to their measurement and their accounting. Key messages for us as an organisation, both in the UK and internationally, is that we want to amplify voices of people that are often not heard. If we're trying to create more value and understand the value that we create for people, it's about listening. It's about being accountable and actually hearing things that are positive but also negative, understanding impacts we're having on people that are unintended as well as the intended ones. And it's about responding to this data, because it's all very good capturing this information, putting it in a report or accounting for it, but we need to respond to that data and make better decisions. So yeah, it's a lot of it's about accountability and even shifting power, dare I say. Brief slide just to say that pick up on that assurance and accreditation. So if you are interested in learning more about the principles and embedding it in your organisation, we have a certificate, or personally as an individual you can become an accredited practitioner. We've got 3 levels of that as well. You know about us, we do lots of training, we do lots of events. We've got a big conference coming up at the start of next year in London, but we do regional events all over the country, and we bring people together to talk about how we get better at doing this, and a range of different topics, as social value is being more and more integral to a range of different sectors and different people. And we embrace that kind of diversity of the memberships. It's not just people from business, the world of business or housing. It's a mixture. We've got people there from public sector, civil society, social enterprises, charities, big businesses, small businesses, academics. Anyone's welcome. Just come along and help us understand this emerging topic even more. So that's who we are, and then a quick recap on webinar 1. As I said, we looked at, actually there's a number of different definitions of social value. There isn't one out there. The Social Value Act has one, and we have another, and I'll just go over that in a second. We did look at the multiple drivers for social value. Why is it important to organisations? Well, I think the 3 key things were that we need to do this to comply with the new regulations. The second one was we need to do this because actually being responsible and treating people well leads to a better business, sort of commercially. And thirdly, there's a kind of moral imperative that we all see that inequality is rising and it's the right thing to do. We then also talked about how businesses are already doing quite a lot of things that can create social value. We then looked at sort of how that fits into a procurement scenario, sort of one contract to deliver some services. Who are the stakeholders involved in that contract, and how might they all experience change in social value as a result of that contract? So that's what we did last webinar. That is pre-recorded, has been recorded, as is this one. And you'll be available to watch them all back again soon. I should also say, a few housekeeping, that the slides will be made available, and you'll also be able to see them. So don't feel like you have to go through some answered notes. Another housekeeping point is that I'd like you to think of some questions, and feel free to pop them in the questions pane, which is on the right hand side, and I can kind of pick those up at the end. So feel free to use that facility. Okay, so again, just a reminder of the definitions of social value as per Social Value UK and Social Value International. We start by looking at changes in people's lives, and these changes are sometimes called outcomes. Sometimes the outcomes are positive, but sometimes they're negative. Sometimes they're the intended outcomes, sometimes they're unintended. So it's about understanding all of these different changes that happen, recognizing that some of these changes or outcomes are more important than others. And it's about quantifying that relative importance that people place on the changes. People may experience a change in the income that they're receiving. Is that as important as the change in self-esteem that they feel? And so it's about understanding what's important to people in their lives, and hopefully making better decisions so we can create more value for people. Apologies, sincere apologies. So forgive me, everyone, for being technologically not au fait and not clicking the right buttons. Let me just jump back a couple of slides, see what you've missed. We were just talking about the network, that's okay. The recap, I think that's okay. The definitions I've just talked about, which, yeah, we're talking about different changes, relative importance. And then here we go. Nice timing. You can now see the scary looking slide, which was from last webinar, where we tried to unpick, well, what are the outcomes and what are these aspects of well-being that need to be measured. And we can see here that there's a grouping of lots of different things that are important to people that make up your well-being. Well-being is a very broad term. Actually, there's a lot of literature around what are the things that constitute a person's well-being. Personal well-being is made up of material things like having enough food to eat, having a healthy body, having, a good environment with a place to live, physical assets sort of thing. And people experience changes in those all the time, and those are important enough for us to measure if we care about well-being. There are relational aspects to our lives that contribute to well-being. How much social interaction we have with other people, connectivity, social capital you might call it, or just relationships with people. And the third sort of group of things are quite subjective. Well-being is subjective in many ways. There's how we feel about ourselves, our self-esteem, how do we feel good, are we functioning well and in control? And that's really important to recognize as an important aspect of well-being. So I don't apologize for going over that again, because I think it's really important that we recognize that it's a bit messy. Social value is not clean cut. It's not clear all the time what it is that we should be measuring, because well-being is quite a broad term, and that's essentially what we're focusing on. So to manage well-being well, we need to be understanding what are the important aspects of well-being that need to be measured and managed. And we also challenged ourselves in the last webinar to say, are we measuring what matters? There's, social value is a combination of social changes, economic changes, and environmental changes. And often we stick to things that are easy to measure. And often the economic is the easiest one to measure because it tends to be about counting money. Or things that are easy to measure, the ones that we see quite often at the moment. And we challenged, is the assumption that giving a job to local people social value? Or if we create an apprenticeship, is that social value? Or if we pay the living wage, is that social value? If we spend X amount with social enterprises, is that social value? These are all assumptions that maybe social value is created, but we don't know that for sure if we just count number of local people in jobs. There are more things that we need to investigate there, and hopefully we'll unpick that in the next 45 minutes. So yeah, it's a combination of economic, social, environmental, and can we capture enough there of what is really important. Okay, so hopefully that was a useful recap of webinar 1. Now let's go into the main topic of today, which is looking at social value in the workforce. And I'm particularly keen to be focusing on this topic because all too often I see social value, businesses tend to think of social value as something that they create for the community. It's something that they do in addition to their core business. And if that's the thinking or the starting point, then it feels like social value has just become CSR, corporate social responsibility, with a different name. But social value is actually much more than that, because it's about, if we've defined it as changes in people's lives and well-being, then it can be applied to the core activities of the business. And it should start by looking first and foremost about the lives of the people in the workforce, whether that's direct employees, full-time, part-time, contractors, volunteers, and so forth. This slide was to illustrate, and we had it in the last webinar, that actually businesses or employers do lots of things that have impact on people's lives, and they range. If you remember, we said on one end of the spectrum, businesses are doing things to protect human rights, not have slaves. Health and safety starts with making sure people are safe in the workplace. There are no accidents. These are kind of fairly minimum thresholds, if you like, of what employers are doing to manage their impact they have on people's lives. But obviously, that is a low bar, and employers are increasingly becoming more progressive in their approach to how they're dealing with people in the workforce. And so you've got lots of initiatives within the workplace around living wages, pay ratios, obviously workers' rights with representation, and then interesting things which perhaps HR departments take control over, which is about fairness, diversity and inclusion, personal development plans, employee engagement, and right through to sort of quite proactive initiatives that some employers have around employee well-being in the workplace, giving people the opportunity to volunteer, give back. This all helps to improve well-being at work. So I like to use this slide to kind of say social value, if we understand that as having an impact on people's lives, well, there's lots that businesses are already doing. And if we really care about creating more social value, we need to be sort of working more towards this right-hand side of the screen. Why does this matter? Well, I'm sure many of you have heard of the Sustainable Development Goals, and just wanted to focus on number 8, which is decent work and economic growth. So the Sustainable Development Goals are a framework for everyone on the planet, set by the United Nations, not just for developing countries, but for all of the 193 countries, I think it is, that signed up to it, and the UK is one of them, to look for a sustainable future, a vision of the future which is more prosperous and more sustainable for the planet and people. So these 17 goals are there for all countries to work towards. Number 8 is decent work and economic growth, which is to promote sustained, inclusive economic growth with productive employment, decent work for all. Now, the UK SSD, which the logo is displayed in the right corner, are an organisation that has helped to sort of measure the UK's performance towards this Sustainable Development Goal. And it wasn't great reading, actually, last year when they published the UK's performance against all of the SDGs. In fact, there's huge underperformance, which really brings into focus the fact that this agenda is not just for developing countries internationally. This starts at home, and there's a lot of work for the UK to do against all of the goals, and in particular here against SDG number 8 around decent work. You can see a lot of reds and oranges there, which indicate that the UK is underperforming, let's say, about promoting good, decent jobs and creation. And this isn't really too much of a surprise, because whilst we know that the published unemployment figures are quite low, we know that hides a different reality, in that there is huge amounts of in-work poverty or jobs that are not secure, and so we've got a long way to go in this country. In 2017, the government issued the Taylor Review, and this is a really good place to start, I think, because it was an inquiry into modern working practices, sort of looking at currently how work is, the current situation, but also thinking about the future and the rapidly changing conditions of the workforce, including as a result of technology and more flexible working lives. And it focused on 3 things, which was looking at the exploitation through work, looking at the need for better laws and helping people to know and exercise their rights more, and then aligning incentives that drive the labour market with an industrial strategy. There was interesting sort of reasons to sort of promote this. So good work matters because it's important that people are given the opportunity to boost their earnings, but crucially it's not just about earning power, it's about being treated with respect and decency. One of the clear and obvious reasons is that the quality of people's work is a major factor in helping people stay healthy and happy. I think we can all testament to that. Obviously, better work will lead to better productivity, and just generally that work should allow people to feel respected, trusted, and take on responsibility. And ultimately, this is about fairness, principles of fairness. So it's a good report. It really sort of unpicks why this is important, and also identifies 7 steps towards fair and decent work. One's about a national strategy, which looks at sort of taxation and policy at the national level. There's a recognition that the gig economy, which has emerged, which allows people to kind of work in flexible ways, can be good for people, in that flexible working is attractive to our modern lifestyles. However, it can't be exploited. Again, there's steps towards making sure that people know their rights within the law. It sort of encourages that it's not just down to regulation, but it's a responsibility of corporate governance and businesses to have good relations within the organisation. It's about empowering people to feel that they have a voice, and that will come through quite consistently in the next few slides. And obviously, there's a nod there to the national living wage, but it's got to be accompanied by other sort of realistic initiatives as well. An interesting extract which I thought I'd put in today is that quality of work is different from one person to another, and we need to recognise that as well. Some people live to work, some people work to live. You've heard that phrase before. So there's a recognition that it is different for different people. It's also important to pull out that pay is recognised as only one aspect of what good quality work is. We can be well paid in a job, but actually have a lack of fulfillment, personal development, work-life balance, etc., etc. So again, it's measuring a range of things, which is important here. And obviously sort of states the obvious, really, that people are most likely to enjoy what they do and they have meaning and involvement at work. And that can be beneficial to business as well, because people will stay in their jobs and it will reduce turnover and be a more efficient workforce. The Taylor report came up with 6 high-level indicators of what quality work looked like. These are here: wages, employment quality, education, training, working conditions, work-life balance, consultative participation, and collective representation. So those are the 6 that came out of the report. It's fair to say that there is a growing consensus around these 6 things, around what decent work looks like. It may be frustrating to say that it's not, uniformly 6. And over the next few slides, I'll show you a few other initiatives that have also tried to pull out what decent work looks like. And you'll see that actually there is a growing consensus and agreement that decent work includes some similar things. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. Work is something that is, whatever sector you're in, you have employment. So there's a growing sort of agreement of what good work looks like. And let's just unpick those. So out of the Taylor report, the Carnegie UK Trust and the RSA were asked to set up a working group, and they came up with 7, which is very, very similar in terms of employment, pay. They've grouped health, safety, and psychosocial well-being, and they've got some indicators here against each of these 7. Voice and representation being there as well, work-life balance, etc. I can send links to all of these as well if you want to look into them. But the point is that there is growing agreement, consensus of what good fair work looks like. Again, this is the Scottish Fair Work Framework. It talks about job security, having respect in the workplace, having opportunities, whether there's a progression or training and learning, having fulfillment. And again, that's that kind of perhaps more subjective aspect, but it's in there. And of course, effective voice and feeling listened to and represented is important. Here I've got the Welsh Fair Work Commission and the Mayor of London's 4 pillars, 6 and 4 groupings, but again, fair reward and pay, features, voice and representation is coming through, security, growth, progression, safety, being an inclusive environment, legal rights and diversity. These are all similar things, and I do this to kind of show that there is convergence. Again, the TUC have got 6. That's the trade union arm, they've just published a report which have these 6 key themes, again, very consistent. And the GMCA is the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, who have been seen as pioneering in their sort of Fair Work Charter. This is a draft where they've got 6 as well, and it starts with a living wage, but goes on to talk about these other things about engagement, voice, flexible working, diversity, productivity, health, etc. So I do that to kind of say this is good news. In the last couple of years, we've recognised in this country that there is an issue. We need to improve what working conditions are. We need to prevent exploitation. We need to create environments where people are, dare I say, enjoying work, or at least sort of having a positive impact on overall health and well-being. So with that in mind, I want to move on now to look at how we might measure this, because Social Value UK is all about counting and measuring, and you may be asking this question yourself internally, whether that's because you've been asked by an external funder or a commissioner, or just generally you want to know. So looking at the I've just picked these 2 initiatives, the Welsh and the London one. You might be able to measure all of these aspects of decent work through policies and practices. And I think in a lot of instances, that's where we're going. We're asking businesses to demonstrate that they are creating decent work through these kind of areas of decent work, and we're saying we'll prove that by demonstrate that by showing us that you have a policy on fair pay or working conditions. Do you have a policy on employee voice, a policy on diversity or skills and progression? Do you have practices that promote flexible working, initiatives around this? And I think that's absolutely right, that we can use policies and practice initiatives to act as indicators of social value, the potential for social value to be created. But I would sort of pause and say, are policies and strategies enough? If we just have a policy and strategy, does that mean that we're creating social value? What are the risks if that's all we do in terms of measurement? Do we need to go further? I've got this nice little picture because last year someone was at a conference saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast, and they gave me this thing. And I think it's really true, because we can all have policies and strategies, but that doesn't really go that far if it's not embedded in the culture. So I would say that we need to go further than just looking for whether people have policies on this, whether businesses have a strategy, and what is it in the culture of the organisation that we can measure, and how can we actually speak to people to understand whether social value, i.e. changes in their lives, have occurred? Are they all positive? And I suppose that comes us back to the question of, well, can we measure well-being? Isn't that the hard thing to measure? And for many years, people have been throwing around a lot of excuses saying it's too hard, but actually there's so much out there now that shows that well-being can be measured. That excuse doesn't exist anymore, not in my book anyway. I just got a picture here of a document that we wrote with one of our members earlier this year, which looked specifically at how well-being can be measured in the workplace. And it was a review of employee engagement tools. So a lot of work or employers have employee engagement mechanisms to kind of get feedback from their staff directly. There's lots of tools to do this. Some of them are a lot better than others. In fact, there's hundreds out there on the marketplace. But the member I'm talking about, Talent Gateway, is a member of Social Value UK, undertook a full analysis of all of these tools and looked at which ones were actually asking questions to their workforce around well-being, And there was a good proportion, I think it was about 20 or 30%, that do have questions around personal well-being in the workplace. So this is a useful document if you're interested in that. It kind of shows how they do that and which ones are good for it. It shows that platforms are collecting data direct from people in the workforce around issues like satisfaction, empowerment, personal growth, peer rapport, their culture of the organization. Do they feel like they get on with people? Do they get on with their managers? Do they feel like they have a voice? And just generally their overall well-being. So this is really interesting, and I've done some other work with members, which has led us to look at employee engagement. And this was a large corporate that I won't give the name away, but they showed me the data that they had on employee engagement, and it was huge. The data set was massive, and the questions were great. The questions were about how respected people felt in the workplace, the work-life balance, stress levels, and when we looked at that and we said, well, is this social value? We came to the conclusion that it was, and that actually they're sat on a lot of data already, and I asked why. Why do you do this? And they came back with the obvious answer that engaged employees are more likely to stay, they're more productive, and it just helps us succeed. So this was really interesting, a bit of a light bulb moment for me a couple of years ago when I saw that, because it made me think that, well, we can measure social value, and we are measuring social value, because lots of employers are voluntarily measuring well-being, or certainly aspects of it. So they must see the value of a happy workforce being a productive workforce. Nobody's asking them to do these employee engagement surveys. So presumably they're doing it because they find it useful, and I hope that they're using it to make some decisions, not just for marketing. I mean, there's a cynical side of me that says I'm sure a lot of them are just might be using the information to promote the brand, let's say, and I've experienced that before myself, working in organizations where the employee engagement is less about you as an individual, more about how much you love the brand, etc. But so I think there's a spectrum in this, and I think we can get better. So I've got a few more slides on how I think we can get better with the measurement. And I think there's probably a cycle which looks a bit like this, where we identify what decent work looks like. And I think we can be grateful because there's so much work being done in this space that as I demonstrated earlier, there's lots of initiatives around fair work, which shows the key bits of decent work. And that then can be turned into policies or schemes or initiatives at the business level. You can recognize that decent work is about fair pay. You can recognize that decent work is about opportunities, and that can be enshrined in policies or certain practice schemes. But I think it also then needs to be supported by primary data, and that's when these surveys can lead to data from the people to actually see if the policies and the initiatives are working. I think that's a really important piece that needs to be followed up. If we just stick with the policies, as I said earlier, we may end up with a situation where a business has good policies and schemes, but people still feel have negative well-being. So there's hopefully some analysis of that quantitative data once data surveys are collected. And then I'd throw in that it's always really important to have good stakeholder involvement, good engagement with people, conversations to verify these results, check that this is right. Are the outcomes that we're measuring the right ones? And if you were here on the first webinar, then you will remember I had that picture up quite a lot. That kind of importance of having open conversations is fundamental to doing social value well. And that feedback loop can then go into the cycle again. So that's my suggestion of what best practice could look like. How does that fit with the Social Value International measurement framework? Well, we talked last week about 10 impact questions. These are the things that if you want to manage your impact, you need to be asking. And two that I've pulled out is number 3 and number 9, it looks like. Number 3 is who experiences changes in their lives as a result of what you do. And I think that's a really important question for businesses to ask. And within the workforce, there will be different subgroups, different segments of the workforce that experience different changes and have different priorities and value different things. So, for example, if you have a workforce that includes people with care responsibilities, maybe they're caring for children or elderly, that might be a subgroup of your workforce that have very different needs or would value things differently. They may value flexible working conditions more than pay, perhaps. And these are certainly issues that we think will emerge if you ask all of these questions together. Certainly, what is the relative importance of outcomes? If you were to sort of ask that question, you do get different segments. For new people in the business, they will have different priorities around perhaps understanding what their opportunities are for training and development. More experienced members of staff will want to know about progression opportunities, things like that. So it will be different for different people. And the other one I wanted to pull out today, which is quite pertinent to this issue of creating social value through jobs and in the workforce, is how much of the change in these outcomes is caused by our activities. Or to put it in other words, would these people have experienced this outcome elsewhere? And this is quite a challenging question. It means that we can't overclaim for social value and social impact. It's asking us to think, hang on a minute, we've given a job to this person, it's a good job, but would this person have got it anyway? And that might sound a bit crazy for you to ask, but if we're talking about maximizing social value and making decisions to create as much social value as possible, it's a really important question to ask, and I'll explain why. Because if we've created a good job and we've measured that it is a good job, it's paying well, people feel respected in the workplace, they have opportunities, their well-being is good, their health, work-life balance, etc. But if we realize that that person probably would have got a job working for a similar firm with similar conditions to a rival business, the chances are that they would have achieved that elsewhere are high, let's say. We can't claim too much social value being created additional, because there is a high likelihood, and I often use the example, somebody who is very well educated, well qualified, goes into a job in a very competitive market. Arguably that person, if they didn't get that job, would have got another job. If you compare that to the situation of somebody who has been long-term unemployed, does not have very good qualifications, has got a lot of barriers to the labour market. An ex-offender, for example, is an often cited example. If you give the opportunity and the job to that person, the chances that that person would have got this job elsewhere are lower. We know that from statistics, and we can kind of see those trends. So that way we can say, well, we're creating more social value here because we've given this job to somebody who is less likely to have had that opportunity to have a decent job. So I raised that one at this point because I think that's something that should be considered and is being considered more and more now when people are saying, well, who is it that you're giving jobs to? Okay, is it a good job, and who is it that's got it? And you can argue that if you've given that good job to somebody who is less likely to have had it, you've created more social value in that instance. The principles of social value we touched on last time. I can send you some reading material on those. When you're doing measurement, these are the principles to apply. First one being involve stakeholders and give people that voice, that opportunity to share their perspective on what changes in their life, what's important to them, what matters most, and whether it would have happened anyway. The other two, be transparent and verify the result, are about reporting and transparency around that. The key to good measurement then is measuring the right outcomes, as we said last time. It's important to think about who defines those outcomes. Are we letting the people that experience the outcomes sort of inform what gets measured? Are they always positive, and are we allowing for any negative outcomes as well? And that important of open-ended questions. So, before we go into questions, we should have a good time for questions. We've got a few conclusions and top tips. First one is to perhaps have conversations with HR, recognise that it's part of their remit as well, or to put it the other way, HR are doing a lot already to manage the social value within the workforce. They know full well that managing people better leads to a better performing business. If HR can move from being focusing on risk and risk management to more progressive opportunities for people to flourish in the workplace, then that's the direction we need to be going. Okay, the obligatory recognition that this is a journey. Bit cheesy, but it really is. So we're all starting somewhere. What are you doing at the moment around this? How can we get better? We have this, rather than doing a one-off, highly rigorous assessment of impact or social value, just do regular, less rigorous assessments of social value and well-being. This is the mouse who's courageous enough to go for the cheese, which is basically saying you've got to take risks. If you want to create more social value, it's about doing things differently, and you can manage that risk through better understanding of what people value and what's happening to them in their lives. So this is about accountability. It's also about innovation and improving. So social value is as much a cultural thing as anything else. And lastly, which is the sales plug, if you're interested, we do have a certification scheme, which is about how you embed social value in your business practice. One being commitment, 2, implement, 3, maximize when you're making better decisions based on social value data. So there we go. I'll give you a free I Love My Auditor t-shirt if you go for that. It doesn't exist, but I'm determined to get that on the market. Those are all my slides, and I hope that's sort of been a useful overview of our view on social value in the workforce. And I'll pause there to see who has any questions, or maybe it's reflections or anything you'd like to share with the group. Okay, so I have some questions now. In what ways can staff representatives play more of a role in improving staff well-being and engagement to improve social value in the workplace? Thank you, Shauna. I don't think there's a one size fits all answer to that question. I think improving staff well-being and engagement is going to be different depending on who's in the workforce. And that idea we touched on earlier of segmentation is really important. Who are the different groups in the workforce that perhaps have different needs, different priorities? So I think it's about understanding first and foremost who is in the workforce, what's important to them, and understanding all those different aspects of well-being as well are important as well. Recognizing that for some people it's about pay, for some people it's less about pay, it's more about feeling respected in the workplace. For some people it's more about having good morale. Some people it's more about terms and conditions. So there's a range of initiatives. Sorry, Shauna, I don't think there's a simple answer to that one. I've got a question here from Sean. Hi Ben, I work for a housing provider and I think it's interesting that we ask our contractors for information about this, but we are maybe not so great at measuring and reflecting on our own practice. As you say though, it is a journey. Yes, that's right. And I think big organisations, even if they get it right internally with their own workforce, how are they checking that or sort of cascading that onto organisations in their supply chain? And I think what I see happening more often than not is that it is reflected in the policies and practices as indicators. As we mentioned earlier, it's quite easy to kind of say, right, we know what decent work is, so we're going to include you in the supply chain if you have good policies on decent pay, flexible working, representation, etc. So I think that is a way for perhaps managing it in the supply chain. I think I would also reinforce my position. I said earlier that it needs to be coupled with some actual engagement from staff about how they feel those policies are being implemented. I wonder if the people on the call work for large organisations or small ones. I do think that for smaller organisations, it is often harder, particularly with that employee engagement surveys. If you've only got less than 10 people, people feel a little bit inhibited in sort of speaking the truth, perhaps, or giving feedback if they know that they're working in a small organisation, that it's likely to be not that anonymous. So I think there are some challenges that exist for smaller businesses or enterprises. I'm not sure what the solutions are exactly, but I'm pretty sure some of those tools out there can accommodate for that. And I'm quite keen to explore that with any organisations that would like to see what best practice looks like for a smaller organisation rather than the big ones. Doesn't look like there's any more written down. Lucinda, are you still on the line? Do you have any thoughts or questions?
No, I think that was a really great session. Thank you, Ben. It's lots of insight, lots of food for thought. I think we'll probably all go away with some ideas on how we can measure the social value we're doing already. So that was great. Thank you.
Okay, good. Well, I hope it has given some food for thought, and I look forward to the next one where we take our thinking outside of the boundaries of our organisation and recognise that we also have impact and create value for other people, other stakeholders, and we're going to focus next time on the communities that we work in. So what we can do to create social value for wider society and the communities that we're working in. So I hope you found today useful. Apologies again for the slight technical hitch at the beginning. We will be sending out the slides. I promise you didn't miss much in terms of visuals, and you can get the recording as well. You'll also have my contact email address, so if you have any burning questions, feel free to contact us. Okay, thanks everyone, and I hope you have a good and productive day.